"Take your son," God said, "your only son whom you love, and offer him as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." The child who had been promised beneath 1,000 stars laughed into being after 25 years of waiting. That same child was now being asked for back. Tonight, the hardest test in the whole of Abraham's story, and the mountain where it was answered. Welcome to Ancient Nights. Every story here is drawn from the ancient world, told in order, from the beginning of time, most of them straight from the Bible, woven with the real history of their age. Tonight, the story of Abraham and Isaac. Isaac grew. The text passes over his early years quickly, but two moments stand out before we reach the mountain, and both matter for what follows. Years before Isaac was born, when the promise had grown old and Sarah still had no child, she had done something the whole ancient world would have understood. She gave her servant Hagar to Abraham, so that a child born to Hagar might count, by custom, as Sarah's own. This was not invention or scandal. It was ordinary law across the ancient Near East. Contracts recovered from the Mesopotamian city of Nuzi, written in the same age as Abraham, record exactly this arrangement. A childless wife providing her husband a servant to bear an heir on her behalf, the child then legally hers. Sarah followed the custom of her world, and Hagar bore a son, whom Abraham named Ishmael. But when Isaac was finally born to Sarah herself, the household that had once been ordered by custom became ordered by pain. Sarah watched Ishmael, now a teenager, and could not bear the thought of him sharing Isaac's inheritance. She asked Abraham to send Hagar and Ishmael away. The text tells us plainly that this was very displeasing to Abraham, for Ishmael was his son too. But God told him not to be distressed, and promised that Ishmael also would become a great nation, for he was Abraham's offspring. Abraham rose early the next morning, gave Hagar bread and a skin of water, and sent her and the boy out into the wilderness of Beersheba. It is a hard scene, and the Bible does not soften it. Hagar wandered until the water ran out, and she set the boy under a bush and walked a distance away, unable to watch him die, and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, the text says, and an angel called to Hagar and opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. Ishmael lived, grew up in the wilderness, and became, as promised, the father of a great people of his own. 2 sons, then, born of one father, one sent into the promise, one sent into the wilderness with a promise of his own. It is worth holding both in mind, for the God of this story does not abandon the child who is not chosen to carry the covenant. Even in exile, Ishmael was seen and heard and blessed. Before Isaac was ever born, God had sealed the promise with a sign meant to last forever. He changed Abram's name to Abraham, father of many, and Sarai to Sarah, and gave them a covenant marked in the flesh of every male in the household, circumcision, on the 8th day of life, a sign carried forward through every generation of the promise to come. Abraham himself, the text tells us, was 99 years old when he obeyed this command, and it was in this same conversation that God first told him plainly, "Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac." It was here too that Abraham laughed, before Sarah ever did. He fell on his face and laughed, the text says, and said in his heart, "Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child?" He even pleaded with God on behalf of Ishmael, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you." But God held to the promise. Sarah would bear a son, and his name would be Isaac, meaning, as we have already heard, he laughs. a name that would carry for the rest of his life the memory of two parents who each, in their own private way, laughed at the sheer impossibility of what they were being told. Isaac remained and grew in his father's household. And then, the text tells us, God tested Abraham. The word matters. Not punished, not tricked, tested, the way gold is tested by fire to see what it is truly made of. And the test came in words that must have stopped Abraham's breath. Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I shall tell you. Every word is chosen with care, and every word cuts deeper than the last. Your son, your only son, for in the sense that mattered to the promise, Isaac alone carried it forward. Whom you love. And then the command itself, plain and terrible. Offer him as a burnt offering. The very words God had used decades before, leave your country, your kindred, your father's house, now returned, but this time pointed not outward at the world Abraham had left, but inward at the one thing he could never leave behind. The text tells us nothing of what passed through Abraham's mind that night. No protest is recorded, unlike the bold bargaining over Sodom only a short time before. Only this. Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took 2 servants and Isaac his son, cut wood for the offering, and set out for the place God had told him. The journey took 3 days. 3 days of walking beside the son he had waited a quarter of a century to hold, knowing what waited at the end of the road. The text gives us almost nothing of those 3 days, no words exchanged, no tears recorded, only the bare fact of the walking, mile after mile, toward a mountain in the distance that slowly grew nearer. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place far off. He told the servants to remain there with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship, and come again to you. Notice that last phrase, and come again to you, in the plural. Abraham said we will return, though he was walking, so far as he yet knew, to bury his son on that mountain. Whether it was hope spoken aloud, or faith too deep to say otherwise, the words themselves already carried the seed of what was coming. He laid the wood of the offering on Isaac, and carried in his own hand the fire and the knife, and the 2 of them walked on together. And then Isaac spoke, the only words of his recorded in the whole scene. Father, he said. And Abraham answered, Here I am, my son. And Isaac asked, Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? It may be the most quietly devastating question in all of Scripture. A boy, walking beside his father up a mountain, innocently noticing what was missing. And Abraham answered him, God will provide for himself the lamb, my son. And the 2 of them walked on together. They reached the place. Abraham built the altar there, and arranged the wood, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. The text does not tell us whether Isaac resisted or understood, or simply trusted his father completely. It tells us only the plain, unbearable sequence of actions. The altar, the binding, the boy laid down, and then Abraham reaching out his hand and taking the knife to slay his son. And it was in that instant, not before, not after, but in the very motion of the raised hand, that the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And the angel said, Do not lay your hand on the boy, or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. The test had reached its furthest point and stopped there, not because Abraham's faith had failed, but because it had been proven completely, proven in the one way that could never be doubted, in the actual motion of a father's hand raised over his only son. And Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. And he took the ram and offered it as a burnt offering instead of his son. He named that place, the text tells us, Yahweh Yireh, the Lord will provide. And it was said, to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. Let us step gently outside the pages of the Bible and understand something crucial about the world in which this test was given. For without it, the full weight of the story is easy to miss. Child sacrifice was not to Abraham an unthinkable horror invented for the sake of the test. It was a real and documented practice among the peoples surrounding him, in Canaan and beyond, across the centuries that followed. Later books of the Bible speak repeatedly and with horror of Canaanite child sacrifice offered to gods the text calls Molech and Baal. And archaeology has confirmed that such practices were real. At the great Canaanite colony of Carthage in North Africa, excavators have uncovered a vast burial ground, a tophet, containing thousands of urns holding the cremated remains of infants, alongside inscriptions dedicating the offerings to the gods Baal Hammon and Tanit. Scholars still debate the precise scale and circumstances of these sacrifices, but the practice itself, among the broader family of Canaanite peoples, is not in serious doubt. This is the world in which God said to Abraham, "Offer your son." It was a command that belonged terribly to the religious language of that age, the kind of demand other gods were believed to make of their worshippers. And this is precisely what makes the story's ending so significant. The angel's hand stayed Abraham's hand. The ram was provided instead. The God of Abraham asked for the same terrible loyalty the gods of Canaan demanded, and then refused at the final moment to accept a child's life as its price. In a world where such sacrifices were real, this story drew with a single dramatic act, an unmistakable line. This God does not want your child's blood. He wants your whole trust, and a ram caught in a thicket will do. Let us step gently outside the pages of the Bible and look at that mountain and that name through the eyes of history. The land of Moriah is named only twice in the entire Bible. Here, in the story of Abraham, and centuries later in the second book of Chronicles describing the site King Solomon chose for the great temple in Jerusalem, built, the text says, on Mount Moriah, on the very threshing floor his father David had purchased. Jewish tradition, reaching back many centuries, has long held these two mountains to be one and the same, that the place where Abraham raised the knife over his son is the same rocky height where, generations later, the Temple of Solomon would stand at the heart of Jerusalem. It should be said honestly that the name Moriah appears nowhere else to confirm this with certainty, and the precise identification has been debated by scholars across the centuries. But the tradition is ancient, and it is the one carried forward by the Jewish people themselves, who have long regarded the rock beneath Jerusalem's Temple Mount as the very place of this story. Whatever the precise geography, the naming itself carries the whole meaning of what happened there. Yahweh Yireh, the Lord will provide. Not simply provided once on that single afternoon. The verb points forward as much as back, a promise as much as a memory. On the mountain of the Lord, it will be seen, it will be provided. A name given to a single mountaintop that would echo across the whole of the story still to come. And then the angel spoke a second time, and the promise Abraham had first heard beneath the stars was given again, deepened now by what had just taken place. Because you have done this, and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and as the sand on the seashore. And in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. The covenant did not merely survive the test, it was renewed by it, spoken again with even greater weight, because now it rested not only on a promise given, but on an obedience proven beyond any possible doubt. Abraham returned down the mountain with his son beside him, alive, and went back to the young men, and they rose and went together to Beersheba. The text does not linger on the walk home. It does not need to. Everything that mattered had already happened at the top of that mountain in the space of a single held breath. For thousands of years, readers have sat with this story and felt its full weight, its strangeness, its terror, its strange and aching beauty. It is not a comfortable story, and it was never meant to be told as one. A father asked to give up the very child the promise depended on. A son who walked up a mountain beside his own father, carrying the wood for his own sacrifice, asking only where the lamb was. But notice what the story refuses to become. It is not, in the end, a story about a God who delights in the suffering of a child. The knife never falls. The angel calls out at the last possible instant. A ram is provided in the thicket, exactly where it is needed, exactly when it is needed. The name given to the mountain is not the place of loss, but the place of provision. The Lord will provide. Whatever this test asked of Abraham, it was never truly about losing Isaac. It was about whether Abraham would trust the giver of the promise even more than the promise itself. Whether the God who had given him a son could still be trusted, absolutely, even when he seemed to be asking for that same son back. This is why the story has echoed for so long, across so many centuries, in the memory of three great faiths that all trace themselves back to this same Father. It asks the hardest question faith ever asks. Will you trust even when the thing you love most seems to be required of you? And it answers quietly through the ram caught in the thicket. The Lord will provide. Not always in the way we expect. Not always before the knife is already in the hand. But at the mountain, when it matters most. Christian tradition, from its earliest centuries, read this same story and saw within it a shadow of something still to come. The early church writer Origen, in the 3rd century, observed that Isaac carrying the wood for his own sacrifice was a figure of Christ carrying his own cross. Other early Christian teachers noticed further echoes. A beloved and only son, journeying 3 days toward the place of his sacrifice, silent and willing, carrying the very wood of his own offering, and in the end restored, alive on the far side of what had seemed certain death. Whether or not one reads the story this way, it is a testament to how deeply this single scene on a Near Eastern mountaintop has been turned over, for thousands of years, by 3 different faiths, each finding within it something essential about the nature of sacrifice, trust, and the God who provides. This story has never faded from memory. In the Hebrew tradition, it came to be known simply as the Akedah, the binding, and it holds a central place in Jewish worship to this day. Each year, on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, this very chapter is read aloud in the synagogue, and the shofar, the ram's horn, is sounded, a sound the tradition connects directly back to the ram caught in the thicket on that mountain, offered in the place of a son. Across nearly 4,000 years, the same story is still spoken aloud, the same horn still sounded, carrying forward the memory of Abraham's raised hand and the voice that stopped it. There is a real walkable geography behind those 3 days, worth understanding. Abraham's household lived, at this point in the story, near Beersheba, in the dry country of the southern hill lands. If the Moriah of this story is indeed the height later crowned by Jerusalem, the distance between the two is roughly 50 miles, a journey of some 2 to 3 days on foot at the pace of the ancient world, climbing steadily out of the arid south into the hill country. It is precisely the kind of distance that would place the destination first in sight only on the 3rd day, exactly as the text describes. On the third day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place from far off. Whatever else remains uncertain about the exact mountain, the journey itself, mile by dusty mile, fits comfortably within the real landscape of that ancient world. One detail the text leaves quietly open is worth pausing on. How old was Isaac on that mountain? The Bible itself never says, and across the centuries different traditions have pictured him very differently. Ancient rabbinic commentary held that Isaac was already a grown man of 37, fully capable of resisting if he had chosen to, which makes his silence in that reading not the helplessness of a child, but the willing consent of an adult who trusted his father completely. Early Christian writers, by contrast, often pictured him younger, a boy still close to his father's side. What both traditions agree on, whatever his age, is this: Isaac himself asked no second question after his father's answer about the lamb. He carried the wood. He lay down on the altar. Whatever he understood, he did not resist. It is one more silence layered over the silences that already fill this story. Abraham's silence on the 3-day walk, and now Isaac's silence at the altar itself. 2 generations, walking together into the same unbearable trust. There is something in that shared silence worth sitting with. We often imagine faith as something spoken, a bold declaration, a confident prayer, words like Abraham's own defense of Sodom, argued aloud on a dusty road. But this mountain shows us faith of a different kind entirely. Wordless, simply placing one foot after another, carrying the wood up the hill without knowing how the story ends. Sometimes trust does not sound like anything at all. Sometimes it looks like a father and a son walking on together, saying nothing more than what needs to be said until the moment when everything is, at last, provided. There is a small, telling detail hidden in the Hebrew word the text uses for what God did to Abraham that morning. The word is nisa, to test, to prove, to try, the same word used of refining gold in fire to reveal its purity. It is not the language of cruelty or trickery. It is the language of revealing what was already true, but not yet fully seen, even perhaps by Abraham himself. And there is a striking clue found centuries later in a letter written to early Jewish believers in Jesus about what may have been passing through Abraham's mind on that 3-day walk. The letter states plainly that Abraham reasoned God was able even to raise Isaac from the dead. If this reading is right, then Abraham's words to his servants, "We will come back to you, both of us," were not a slip or a hope spoken past his own fear. They may have been the plain statement of a settled conviction that the God who had brought a son out of 2 bodies as good as dead already, out of Sarah's barren womb and Abraham's own great age, could surely bring that same son back from an altar, if it came to that. The test on this reading was never truly a test of whether Abraham would let Isaac die. It was a test of whether Abraham trusted the God of the impossible completely enough to walk forward without needing to know how the impossible would be solved this time. There is a shape to Abraham's whole life that becomes visible only now, looking back from this mountain. It began with a call to leave your country, your kindred, your father's house. And it reaches its hardest point with a call to give up the one thing that Call had, after 25 years, finally delivered to him. The same threefold weight from that first command in Ur, country, kindred, household, narrows here to a single point: your son, your only son, whom you love. Abraham's entire journey, from the ziggurat of Ur to the altar on Moriah, is the story of a man asked again and again to hold everything he had with an open hand, to receive each gift as a genuine gift and not as something owed to him or something he could grip so tightly that it took the place of the God who gave it. The tower builders of Babel had tried to hold on, to build something permanent for their own name. Abraham's whole life moved in the opposite direction, called to let go, and let go again, and in the letting go, to receive back more than he had ever released. And so we leave Abraham and Isaac tonight, walking down from that mountain together, father and son, alive, the ram's ashes still smoking behind them on the altar of provision. The promise that had once seemed impossible beneath the stars, and had once seemed lost again on that mountaintop, now stood twice confirmed, spoken once in the desert night, and spoken again on the height called Yahweh Yireh. But we have moved ahead of ourselves. For before the child was ever promised again, before the mountain was ever climbed, something else had happened in Abraham's story. Something dark and fiery that fell on a city not far from his tent, in the very days the promise of Isaac was first spoken aloud. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and of the judgment that fell upon the cities of the plain, we will tell it together next time.